And he looks at my dad and he goes, "You're Maggie Larkin's father?" And my dad says, "Yeah." And he's like, "How much you need?" So my dad used to tell that story. And what he said was, I was writing checks on my 8-year-old daughter's reputation. He knew then that I would have influence beyond my authority.
That's Maggie Larkin Hicok. I'm Kara Duffy, and this is the Powerful Ladies Podcast. Welcome to the Powerful Ladies Podcast.
Thank you.
I'm really excited you're here. You're one of my favorite humans, and we've been talking about you having on the podcast for a while, so it's finally come around.
Yeah.
You are also a fellow coach consultant, and I met you through the fabulous Eatons, Nancy Eaton, who has been a 2-time podcast guest, once for herself and once with Reagan for CASA.
Oh, nice.
But I'd love for you to tell everyone your name, where you are in the world, and what you're up to.
Like geographically where I am, or?
Yeah, sure. We can cover all of it, whatever feels good to you.
So I'm Maggie Larkin Hicok. I am married to David Hicok. We live in Lakewood, California, which is right adjacent to Long Beach. And we've lived in this house for about 5 years.
And what do you do? What are you up to? How do you describe how you're changing the world?
I am a coach, I'm really in the space of, I used to say I was a business coach, but I quickly learned I'm not a business coach. I am a coach in the space of culture. So I generally work with C-suite folks, and what we work on is their ability to lead their culture and to be a model for the culture they want in their organization.
That's not an easy task.
No, it's not.
So knowing that you have confidence in your business and services being needed, this comes up with my clients too. How do we be the leaders we want to be? How do we manage the people that we end up hiring and have on our teams?
Right.
And how do we make sure that our values are actually showing up in those interactions? Because sometimes running a business is like being on a life raft. And when you're in a life raft, people don't always prioritize the warm, fuzzy mission, vision, values.
Right. Well said.
So how are you getting in there with this C-suite to really make a difference for them?
Well, I would say over time, my sorting mechanism has gotten better. So when I first started working, I was willing to take on anybody. And I've gotten more picky, more really interested in people who want to be made a difference with, if that's proper English. I'll work with somebody who's really, kind of a problem child, if you will, but they don't get what I have to offer. And so I've found that I'm more of a fit for somebody who really wants to struggle with, what does it mean to be a good leader? And like you said, it's not easy. Where I find I can make the biggest difference is with somebody who's really searching for access to being a good leader and willing to examine their own point of view, their own impact, their own relationship with the people they work with and the world they serve, if you will.
Well, and there's that, statement, colloquialism, phrase of it's not personal, it's business.
Right.
And that's such BS, because business is made up of humans, and every choice we make does impact somebody on a personal level.
Absolutely.
Hopefully for the better. And it is like we're working with human beings all the time.
Yes.
So when you see a hot mess of a leader, like where do you begin? Where can someone listening who's going, "Oh no, I'm a leader. I'm probably not doing anything right." Like where can they start to get on course so that they can have a little bit more confidence that maybe they're leading in the right direction?
Well, I guess the first place that I would start is having them articulate what they're up to. Well, no, I'll even back up further than that. Where I generally start with people is what are their core values? And is the work that they're doing in the setting they're doing it available to them to actually fulfill their core values? So if you're one of the things that we talk about is if you are, whatever situation you're in, you will either feel the impact of your core values being honored, or you will fight like the devil to get them honored, or you'll just go, you'll just leave. So, one of the places I start with people is what are your core values? And do you see the possibility of you actualizing those values in the position you're in right now? And if the answer to that is yes, it could be, yeah, but I don't know how. Well, that's great. That's why we're working together. Um, if the answer to that is yes, then absolutely you know, we can make magic.
Yeah. Well, and there's the values of the business,
Hmm.
and there's the values of the individuals who are working there. And sometimes they align, sometimes they don't. Um, if someone is working for a company that their values are incongruent with what the business values are, should they leave? Is that a conversation to have? Like, how do you when your values don't align with the place you're working at, can you change it or should you leave?
Well, I do believe that you can impact it. So I was talking to a client. This just came up with not just. I've been working with this guy for quite some time, and um, I'm kind of an off with their heads sort of person. I have a short burn, if you will. This guy has a long burn, and I was probably after a couple of months just constantly questioning him. Can you f- can you realize your core values in this setting? And one of his values is loyalty. So the conversation about leaving was really hard for him to wrap his head around. So in that case, I don't know that he could have left. Um, so what I did then was just coach him on how to express himself as authentically as he possibly can in a situation that felt very hopeless to him. And fortunately, the kind of the powers that be saw what he was talking about and made some significant changes. Are they out of the woods yet? It'll take some time, but definitely he is beginning to, well, first of all, he's fulfilling that value of loyalty, right?
For sure.
And the other integrity was one of the other. There's an opportunity for it now. So I don't know if I really answered your question. Sometimes, yes. Sometimes the answer is just, get out. And other times it's shift your relationship to what's going on so that you can impact it in the most positive manner.
Mhm. For me, values are also something that's so important when you're interviewing somebody to
Mhm.
expand your team because you can't, I don't know, maybe this is inaccurate, but I would say that you can't teach someone to share your values. It's like just a personality trait at that point. Like that's what matters more to them. And sure, I think your values might adjust slightly over time and life experiences, but If someone doesn't value loyalty and that's really important to you, or someone doesn't value collaboration and that's really important to you, it's going to be really hard to make everything work the way you need it to. For companies that do interview with looking for people's values, do they have a higher success rate, or does that just mean they might have an easier starting point?
Well, I think we have a different take
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
that. So, in my experience, values don't have to line up necessarily. Um, there needs to be the opportunity and the appetite to collaborate given what your values are. So I can interact really successfully with somebody who has a high loyalty value, although that loyalty isn't one of my values. I, I think what is most important in that conversation, when I first started doing this work around values, which is about 12 years ago, I used to say, all values can collaborate as long as one of them isn't axe murdering. So I think that when we really honor each other and each other's values, we find a way to cooperate and we find a way to appreciate. And so just because I don't share the same set of values that you have, if we are both authentically operating from our values, the tendency is we will make something extraordinary happen that is kind of outside of both of our point of view,
Mm-hmm.
current point of view.
Yeah. I love that. How did you get into this work?
Um, well, I majored in sociology in university and um, wanted to be an archaeologist. So there you go. That
Me too.
really
Yeah, that was how I started going to school, and then it became a minor. Mhm.
right. Well, I didn't
Well,
even minor in it. I think I minored in biology, but I can't imagine now, given the way I deal with science, that I ever could have successfully minored in any of the sciences, any of the hard sciences. But I was always really interested, and I looked at the list of things we were going to talk about, and if I part of it was history, I think our personal history. But if I look at my personal history, I had a great upbringing, and not without its trials and tribulations, as we all have. But I remember as a kid always wondering, how is this working? Kind of who's really in charge here? What stuff seems to come in that changes the mood and changes the atmosphere. I didn't always have language for it, but I remember noticing that as a kid, like, well, that was weird. Or that was awesome. So I've always been interested in how groups operate. How do they get along? And I worked for a very long time for a adult Werner Earhart and Associates was the name of it. And I was what they called first the graduate manager and then the participation manager. So it was all about how do you get people once they've done the initial program, how do you get them to completely to do other things, to want to participate in other things. So that was that added to my curiosity about it. And then a friend of mine, a guy who did volunteer work there, started his own business. And he was always complaining about how he couldn't make it happen. And, he didn't have the right employees, or the ones he had were doing something. And his name was Dan. And I was like, okay, Dan, you need to call me every morning. Tell me what's going on. We'll talk about it. We'll make a game plan and um, we'll go from there. So we started doing that. And I was just doing it because the poor guy was miserable and I was kind of tired of listening to him grouse about it. And one day he handed me some money. And it wasn't very much, but I was like, what's this all about? And he's like, well, this is your commission because things are working. And then it got to be more, and then it got to be more. And when at one point, I was thinking, I could do this with 10 people. I could actually make a living doing this, or, kind of. So I started getting interested in that notion of coaching. And a friend of mine introduced me to a woman who had a consultancy in Arizona. And I worked with her for, I don't know, close to 12 years, 15 years, maybe, and really got grounded in how to work with teams and how to coach people using the skill sets and the kind of the discipline and methodology that I learned in being a participation manager. And at some point in the mid 2000s, went out on my own.
Were you ready and running towards to doing things on your own, or was there some trepidation?
Oh, major trepidation. Um, but also a feeling that I didn't want to be doing somebody else's work, which was, when you own a consultancy we were all independent contractors, but at some point there were maybe 25 of us. But it was very much, structured, a woman who knew what she wanted, and, you did it her way or you didn't do it at all. And at some point, I wanted to kind of goof around more than she did.
How does goofing around show up in your work?
I think it's just really about being yourself and being willing to see the humor in it all. Um, Actually, one of the things that I really appreciate about the work that I did with her organization is when I was brand new, we did this course. It was a week-long course, and there were different parts of it, and different of the consultants. We usually worked in teams of 3, sometimes 4, would deliver different parts of the work. And I was really new to it. And she said to me, okay, get up there and, lead this part. I was like, okay. So I go up there and, I do the whole thing, and I'm, being a coach, being a consultant, and and we take a break, and I come to the back of the room. She's like, what was that? And I was like, what was what? She's like, oh, you got up there and you got serious and you got all school marmy, and, it was just weird. And I was like, well, I didn't want to look like a goofball. And she said, Maggie, you are a goofball. That's what we like about you. So be a goofball. That works. And so that was really the beginning of me realizing that I could have fun with this. That if I would just be myself, then whatever I had to contribute, share, participate with my clients, it was good. I was going to transmit that by being myself.
I don't think enough people realize that when they are themselves and build their business around who they actually are, like that's how I help people double their money.
Mm.
And of course, there's like other just really simple systems that I'm amazed don't exist for people. And that also can help out a lot. But
Absolutely.
usually the big jumps are like actually being you. I hate the word niche, like and niching down. And it's just, I don't like how it's used in most common business vernacular. But there is something really powerful about being a magnet and a light by being
Yeah.
who you really are to attract who actually wants to hang out with you and learn from you and work with you. Like that's almost like reverse niching. Like I'm just going to be myself and see who shows up.
Right. Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly.
And And I work with so many different types of industries and people that when someone are asked, like, what's your niche? I'm like, the only thing I can say is that we share values.
Mm.
Like, so whatever value niching looks like, I think that's what I'm doing. But
Value niching. That's something.
yes. um, but it's to me, it's such a gift to help people in this space. And I've gotten so much out of being a coach and a consultant, no matter what I was working on, that like I want other people to feel that. I want people to feel like when they're doing what they're supposed to do and they're like, kind of like you're like, why did you pay me? I was doing it anyway.
Right.
Like, how has being a coach and consultant changed you and how you see the world?
Well, it's made me have to really practice what I preach.
Oh, yeah.
So, um, my background is Irish, and I don't want to smear the entire Irish culture, but we do have a reputation for being judgy. And I was really good at it. And, one of the things I am always talking with people about is there another way to see what you are looking at than the current perspective? Because the current perspective is not giving you what you want. And, I guess that old saying is those who know, those who, is that what it is? Those who know do, and those who can't teach. I forget how that
Yeah.
thing goes, but something like that.
Mhm.
Um, so that's one thing that's really changed for me is my ability to notice when I'm just stuck in my point of view and um, kind of have a sense of humor about it. And it just happens all the time, right? You know this. I came home from doing errands yesterday and I my husband had dropped off his car and I picked him up. I went to the grocery store while he stayed in the car with the dogs. And then I had to go do something else that was for both of us. And I come back and the groceries are still on the counter. And I immediately was like, God, you can't even put the fucking groceries away. So I begrudgingly, and then I noticed that the perishables were put away. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, that's good. And then David comes out of his office and he's like, oh, by the way, Lily, our dog, our 8-year-old, threw up all her lunch. And so that was a big mess I had to clean up. And I was like, okay, well, all right, judgy pants. He actually was doing something that serves the whole household. And, you jump to some conclusion about I'm the only one that does anything around here. So, but that's kind of a hard lesson to learn, right? Is the ability to stop yourself and notice that you've just, you know, giving people, interacting with people as if the way you see it is the reality and not giving any, for instance, in that situation, just not giving any thought to maybe something came up or maybe had to jump on a call or who knows, just being judgy about I'm the only one that does anything around here. And that's something you have to live to be able to have those conversations with people who are managing much more complex situations than me coming back from errands to find the groceries still on the counter.
Yeah. And I had a conversation with a client where I I was like, "Well, what if you're wrong about this scenario?" And you could see them react. I'm like, "Okay, well, maybe you're not wrong, but what if you're not right?" And they were
Mm.
like, "Okay, tell me more." But it is like we forget to be curious And obviously it's an advantage sometimes because using past-based information helps us be really efficient sometimes. It helps us
Absolutely.
go and move, but whenever we're in that conflict state or whatever, or even in just an icky state, like, we have to get curious. I forget, I think, is it Saban, Coach Saban, who says, "If you get furious, get curious?"
Mm,
And I love that statement, and curiosity is actually one of my big values.
mm,
Like, curiosity and learning kinda hang out
yep.
together, and it's we often don't think when we're leading teams or in relationship with people that we have time to get curious. We have
Right.
time to figure out what's actually going wrong. So I'm curious your perspective because sometimes I do think we just need to make sure everyone knows how we feel and like move through a situation because there just truly isn't time and it is a red flag situation. And other times we do have to pause even when we think we shouldn't and figure it out. Do you agree with that? Or like how can we have it all and stay on track, stay on time, not let the customer down, especially in like an event situation that's live? Like there are moments when I'm like, we're gonna talk about this later, but go fix this right now. So like when is it okay to be more reactionary and just kind of demanding, like diva mode maybe, versus be
Mm.
in a and feel free to correct any of my word choices. And then when is it okay to or when should you take more time to be the leader that you want to be?
Well, I think you have to be really discerning about timing weighed against moving a conversation forward, right? So, like in your event, it's probably not the time to, figure out what exactly went wrong. It's just really fix it, right? So, I think the sort of the rule of thumb for me is if something goes by you once, well, you probably can let it go. So in that moment, something, microphone fell off the table or, somebody pulled your earbud out of your ear, who knows? So in the moment, it's really critical. But if it doesn't come back up again, probably isn't worth going into. If something comes back a number of times, two, three, it's kind of personal how you want to interact with that. But if it comes back more than twice, I think it's really important that you address it and also address it in a neutral environment, if at all possible. So don't have that hard conversation when everybody's hot, is how I talk about it with my clients. It's an important conversation to have, but you really want to have it when cooler heads prevail. So again, just going back to that simple example of coming back and seeing the groceries. Had I gone after him at the level I was reacting, well, big fight would ensue because, I'm taking care of the dog and I'm doing this. And we'd both be like, nobody appreciates me around here.
Yeah.
And I really have learned to manage most of the time my upset so that I can really look, is this something I need to talk about? Or is it just, I got thwarted in the moment. So that's one of the things that I really work on with people is check it out and make sure, first of all, that you know what you want to ask, that you know the request that you want to make of somebody. And was it just a momentary thing where somebody inadvertently tripped over a cord and pulled the headset out of your head? Or is there really an issue with that person not being present in the
Yeah.
environment
Yeah.
or something like that?
If we go back to 8-year-old you, would she have imagined that this is the life that you have today?
No. Can I tell a story?
Please.
So when I was about 8 years old, my parents moved out to California when I was about 3, and we moved into a house that was very close to where my dad was going to work. And um, so 5 or so years later, I guess, I don't know the exact time. I think I was around 8. We moved to the house that I grew up in, and my mom lived in that house until she died in 2017. And we had a next across the street neighbor. Her name was Mary, and she and I would ride our bikes everywhere. And one of our favorite things to do was to ride over to the liquor store, which was really the first mini markets, right? We called it the liquor store, but and it had this wall of candy. I mean, just amazing amounts of candy. And so Mary and I would ride our bikes over there, and we'd get candy for whatever we had. And the guy who ran it, his name was Bill Doherty, and he was a former Long Beach police detective, and he'd written a book, and I just had the biggest crush on him and wanted to be a detective. And so we would have, what I considered long conversations over our candy purchases. So in those days, the local liquor store was also your ATM. And so my dad was going on a business trip, and it was like a Sunday night or something. And he went to the liquor store, and whatever time, early 60s, he wanted to cash a check for $50, which was a big deal. And so, Bill's giving him the up and down, and why is your address a mile down the road? Why aren't you going to your other local store? And my dad's explaining to him, and he said, you probably know members of my family. My daughter comes in here all the time for, she loves your candy selection. And he looks at my dad and he goes, "You're Maggie Larkin's father?" And my dad says, "Yeah." And he's like, "How much you need?" So my dad used to tell that story. And what he said was, I was writing checks on my 8-year-old daughter's reputation. And he knew then that I would have influence beyond my authority for most of
Ooh,
my life.
that's a power to have.
Yeah. And that's a pretty powerful way to have my dad think about me, right?
Mm. Huge.
Yeah, huge. It kind of had us go head to head from time to time. But it was also great to have him in my corner and have him believe that I had influence beyond my authority. So that's kind of how I look at it, right? Is that I am lucky enough to have people who do really big, complex jobs trust me to be part of their inner circle and part of their advisory council, if you will. And, I guess I would tell my 8-year-old self, one, your dad was right. And two, is really honor that gift, that
Mhm.
privilege.
Well, that leads me to want to know how you define powerful and ladies, and if those words put next to each other changes either of their definitions.
I think that's just really standing in your own self and your own authenticity. And a lot of stuff plays, not plays into it, but goes into that. Like, being powerful means, in my mind, being courageous, being adventurous, being not so much unafraid, but willing to try it. Yeah. So I love the word powerful. And I'm having sort of an appreciation for ladies. I'm I'm getting there in my appreciation for that term. But I also think it's kind of one of those ones where you go, Wait a minute, ladies aren't supposed to be powerful." So I guess I'm appreciating the sort of the juxtaposition of the interpretation of powerful and ladies in our society anyway, in our Western society. And one of my favorite books growing up was Island of the Blue Dolphins,
Oh, yeah.
which, for people who don't know, it's the story of, real or imagined, of a native young girl who gets stranded on an island in the Channel Islands. And the actual, this is terrible, I can't think of the name of the tribe, but the actual tribe really lived there. So this is the story, whether again true or not, of her, what she had to go through. And I just remember thinking, yeah, of course she would make it. And of course she would befriend the animals of the island and, and also provide herself nutrition and fish and hunt and, learn all the things that she had to learn to survive by herself on an isolated island. And I think that really shaped how I think about women and what we're capable of and what we can aspire to do. It's just there's nothing we can't do. And we get told a lot that we can't or we shouldn't or, something along those lines. And it's just, as we say in the business, well, that's just a bunch of hoo-ha.
Truth. Yeah. Well, it's why this all got started. I couldn't believe
Mm.
I would call people and they'd be like, I'm not powerful. And I'd be like, what? Like, no, like I've called you, I've knighted you. Like it's already been decided. I didn't ask you to agree.
That's right.
Um, so
Our
it is
committee has met, and yes, you have met the criteria.
exactly, exactly. Um, but it's also like there's just so much negativity being talked
Mhm.
about everywhere and happening at such extreme levels.
Yeah.
And I do know that statistically, planet Earth is the most peaceful it has been in centuries.
Mm.
But it doesn't, and also the safest it's been in centuries. But it doesn't
Really?
feel, yeah, yes. But it doesn't feel that way because we actually see what's happening in other places that we never saw before
Right.
in live. So it's
Oh,
like
well,
this,
we have to talk more about that. I mean, maybe not
yeah,
now, but
sure.
I want to know about that research and, all
Yeah.
that, because that's really encouraging. I was talking with a guy, sorry to interrupt your story.
No, no, no. Go ahead.
Uh, and he was saying, we're just in such a mess. It's like the worst it's ever been. And I said, really? Is it? I don't know. I didn't have that information that you just said, but kind of instinctively, I was like, is it really? Or do we just know about more? Do we just have access to information that we haven't had access to? And he's like, oh no, worst it's ever been. And I did kind of think, oh, that is what a guy would say, isn't it?
Well, and even economically in the US,
Mm.
more people have access to things they've never had before. More people have a job than they've ever have had in like the unemployment rate is low. More people have education, more people have a car, more people like all like if we can go back 100 years what our life is now versus then, like there's so much more access, food, like protection,
Mm.
but like we're not measuring it equally and we're only seeing what gets ratings
Yeah.
talked about.
Right.
And the same thing happened like in the 90s, like the 90s were super safe compared to the 70s and 80s.
Yes.
And yet they had the after school specials and Dateline and all these shows that were freaking everyone out about what happened, especially between like after school when your parents got home because of the latchkey kid generation that was still going on. Kids were totally fine. They were safe. Like all the statistics were so low, and yet the fear that parents still have about like letting a kid leave the house. Whereas no one even asked my parents if they were home. Like they didn't know. My
Right.
grandparents had not that they never knew, but they weren't paying attention to what all the kids were doing. And even when I grew up, I didn't have cell phones. I would leave my bike and I would check in, but my mom had no idea where I was or what I was doing.
Right. And we're drinking out of the hose and we're eating whatever we could find. And
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's like it's crazy to think that we always see as negative, and we think
Mm-hmm.
that the economy is bad. And that's also too, like clients will get all spun out about, like since COVID, it's been recession's coming any day now. And I'm like, okay, it's been 4 years.
Right.
Like billionaires keep getting richer. So what train do you want to get on?
Right.
And so it's like there is that component of like we can create our own reality at any time.
Absolutely.
If you want to go get clients, go get them. Like go. And if everyone else is freaking out, good. Let them freak out at home. Go have fun. Go do the thing. Like go. It's really interesting to see the complete difference between statistics and the
The reality we live
experience.
in. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You were also in that list was I'm looking up something on my phone. Sorry to look
You're
away.
okay.
One of my favorite quotes from the Talmud is, we don't see things as we are, we see them as we are. Talmud, not Talbots. That's different. Although I'm sure there's a good quote in there too. But the
Can,
Talmud.
can you
And
repeat that quote again?
we don't see things as they are. We see them as we are. And we get enrolled. We have a ban on CNN in our house because it's like the hype show. It's the, oh my God, we're all going to die show. And I think that's true of a lot of media. And I think we really need to curate what we're willing to look at and what we're willing to listen to, and really listen to it with a uh, really discerning mind. There's a quote. So the four agreements, the four agreements: be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally. I'm looking at my board because I have them written up on my office. Always do your best. And then the fifth one is be skeptical and listen for the truth. And I just think that is so important in our environment right now, in our world, in our society, is that we really have to be skeptical of things. Not cynical, but skeptical, and really listen for, is that the truth, or is that just some story somebody made up? And not even, with
Maliciously.
maliciously,
Mm-hmm.
with some bad motivation. Just they just made it up. It's just so important to really think for yourself and to not be persuaded by information that you haven't really investigated. And I think we tend to just hear something and run with it without going, wait a second, does that really fit my experience? Is that really what I think that person is up to? Or, uh, just, does this look real to you? And
Yeah.
really be willing to ask yourself that question. David and I joke all the time, I read it on the internet, so it has to be true.
Yeah.
Come on now.
Well, speaking of David, before I let you go, I would love you to share a story that I just learned about how you and David started your relationship. Because when I heard this, it gave me hope that
Aw,
you don't need to leave your house
right.
to find your person. So where I'd love you to begin this story is like when you're talking to your friend asking for help.
So I was working with a guy. His name is Tom Lutz. He's an amazing man. And we had just finished a program and it was really successful and people were, singing our praises. And we went out for dinner after the last session, and he was in a relationship with somebody that he's just known for a really long time, very happy about it. And he's like, okay, what's going on here? Why are you not in a relationship? And I was like, I don't know. And he's like, do you, so I get to cuss, right? He's like, do you just turn into a raving bitch when you're in relationship? What's the deal? He's like, you're smart, you're attractive, you make good money, you like to have fun. I don't get it. What's the deal? And I was like, I don't know. I had been divorced probably for 10 years at this time. And I said, I don't know. Do you want to be my coach? And he said, sure, I'll be your coach. And I kind of was a little bit annoyed at him, like, stop bothering me about this. And so I said, okay, coach, what's my first move? And he's like, do what you love and he'll show up. And I was like, oh, you mean like lie on my couch and play words with friends? He's like, no. So he's a really outdoorsy guy and hiker, and it's just really, really sailor and everything. Sits in the snow to meditate every morning. Like literally, he lives in Colorado and sits in snow to meditate. So he was aghast that I would say lay on my couch and play words with friends. Well, about a week later, David, who I've known for over 30 years and who I had a crush on, but at the time he was married and I was married, contacts me on Words with Friends. Like, that little chat thing that I don't play Words with Friends anymore. I'm not even sure it's around, but the little chat thing. He's like, hey, how you doing? Voice from the past. So we started communicating and we, played Words with Friends. We talked in the chat, and he was in Southern California. I was in Portland at the time. And he said, well, next time, maybe I said, next time I'm down there, because I visit my mom there a lot, we should, have a drink. So we got together. And, at first it was kind of awkward. We'd known each other a really long time, but our lives had gone different ways. And he was out of a divorce and his father had just passed away and my mom was really sick and it was weird, but we just kind of kept at it and kept, he was like, you don't want to be in a relationship with me. I am moody. I am selfish. I'm like, well, I'm not moody, but I am selfish and we might be able to make this work. And we started dating our first official date was in April of 2015. And we got married in 2018 and we are living happily ever after.
I love it. I just, because everyone says like, so many people are at home right now, working from home. You're exhausted. You're staying home. You're like Netflix and chilling by yourself. Like it's not. And so the idea that you can be on your couch and meet your person is just really refreshing.
Yeah.
Because usually the answer is you have to go outside, which I do think most people need to leave your house no matter what. But it's nice to know that you didn't have to force anything and you were just being you and he showed up.
And I tried forcing it. So
Yeah.
I was on, what was that one? It wasn't Match, but it was one where they did all these
eHarmony.
eHarmony. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So and it's annoying to fill out. I remember I was sitting on my couch watching the Super Bowl after being somewhere, Canada or England or something. And I was exhausted and I'm filling this out and I'm just getting more and more annoyed with all these questions I have to answer. And the last question is, what's the range? And I was like, oh, I don't know, 50 miles. Sure. So I did put in 50 miles and no matches. Do you want to expand your? So I go, sure. And incrementally, right? And then I'm the whole United States. And then I'm like North America and no matches. And I'm like, freaking, is Galaxy one of the options?
Yeah.
So that whole thing didn't work for me, but just, really like kind of relaxing and doing something that, my life isn't about words with friends.
Of course not. I see you out doing things more than not. So I don't
Right.
want anyone listening to have the illusion that you are hanging out on your couch by yourself these days. Yeah.
But I think if you are just, kind of willing and ready and not worrying about it, because whenever I was worrying about it, nothing. Well,
Mhm.
things would show up, but they would quickly reveal, not things, people would show up, but they quickly reveal themselves as not a good fit.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it is kind of a cute story.
I love it. Well, for everybody who wants to work with you, hire you, hang out with you, play words with friends with you in a non-romantic way, where can they find you, follow you, and support you?
I am not very available on social media, but I am on LinkedIn, Maggie Larkin Hicok. My company is Maggie Larkin Consulting. You could certainly find me there. You could also email me at Maggie Larkin Consulting. Uh, at what is my mlconsulting@gmail.com. That's what it is. Yeah, you can find me there. And, mostly it's word of mouth.
Mhm.
So if somebody can't find me on the two things I just said, please ask Kara because she knows how to find me.
Yes, I do.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for being a yes to the Powerful Ladies podcast and sharing your wisdom with everyone today.
So I appreciate the invitation very much.
Of course, it's such a treat to have you in my life and to get your wisdom on a regular basis. So thank you, and I look forward to getting to see you and hang out with you soon.
I hope it's very soon. Thanks, Kara.
All the links to connect with Maggie are in our show notes at thepowerfulladies.com. Please subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening and leave us a rating and review. Join us on Instagram at Powerful Ladies or at Kara_Duffy. And you can also find me at karaduffy.com. I'll be back next week with a brand new episode. Until then, I hope you're taking on being powerful in your life. Go be awesome and up to something you love.